This is part 5 of my series for beginning photographers who are new to the Olympus E-M10 Mark II, and today we're going to be talking about the focusing system in the camera. The E-M10 Mark II uses what they call a contrast detect based focus system, and all that means is it's looking for high contrast areas within the frame that it can kind of lock into and acquire the focus. Things that have lines or patterns or textures or grains, these kind of things the camera can easily focus on and, get the picture. And the good thing about contrast detect system is they're very accurate. I mean, once it acquires focus, generally speaking, that image will be tack sharp on that focus point. That being said, like most focusing system, it has a weakness, and that's when you start to get into low light. Maybe a little more so than other types like phase detect systems. But that being said, I mean, there's workarounds for that, and I'll talk about some of those as well. But let me go ahead and just try to demonstrate the contrast detect system so you get a little better understanding of what I mean by looking for areas of high contrast. Now, I'll be using my old film camera, my Olympus OM2N, and on this camera here, we have like a little black metal plate here that's flat, no texture, and would represent a nice, sort of low light, low contrast type area that you would want to try to focus on potentially. And then next to it is the leather grain, okay? And then above that, we have the buttons and dials with silver and black, very, very high contrast. So let's see how the camera handles these different areas on the camera. Alright, so what I'll do first is I did a factory reset so we'd all be on the same page, and I have my 7 to 14 millimeter f4 lens on the camera. And I'm going to change the touch to focus point. First, let me just go to touch to focus only, and I'll talk about the icons here for as it relates to the autofocus system in a minute. But let's say I want to focus right on the back of the camera here on this metal plate. Okay. Let's see how the camera handles that. And I'm half pressing the shutter, and you can see it's struggling. And you'll notice up here in the top right corner, the green light blinks. And when it's blinking, it's having trouble acquiring focus, or it has not acquired focus. But if it's solid green, then that means the camera, and you'll hear the beep that the camera's acquired focus. But let's move over here, say to the grain. And when there's just a little bit more texture, even though it's kind of dim, the camera can, acquire focus on that. And then of course the dials up here, which are black and silver, the camera has no trouble at all. So that's kind of what I mean by contrast the areas within the frame. Now there's, as I've mentioned, there's a couple of workarounds to help you acquire focus. And one is, some people, they'll buy a flash that have autofocus illuminators in it, which throws, red grid lines on the subject. That helps the camera focus in low light because it's just essentially adding light to the subject with contrast by using lines. And Olympus has included an LED light here to illuminate the subject in low light. And honestly, this is pretty useless because a lot of times the lens I'm using blocks that little LED anyway. So I don't get much use out of this. And then other times people will just bring, a flashlight with them. So this is probably the easiest. I got this at the dollar store. You can just illuminate the subject like so, and then you can see it very easily acquired focus. Let me turn this back to touch to focus only. And you can see easily acquires focus. But if I take the light away, you can see it's struggling again. It's getting a little bit, but not always. And you've probably experienced this a lot when you're indoors trying to get pictures, and the lens will start what they call hunting, going back and forth, looking for something to focus on. Alright, so another way to kind of get around this, and it's not really a workaround but a solution, is to use faster lenses. So this is my f4. I'm going to put on my f2, which is 2 stops faster, which means it lets in 4 times as much light. And let's pick the same focus point. And you can see that this lens really has no problem focusing. So it's something you need to think about when you start buying lenses, is if you're doing a lot of shooting indoors or in low light, you want to buy the fastest lens you can. And not only because, you know, and a lot of people, they talk about, oh, get the faster lenses for, you know, you can shoot in lower ISOs, get less grain, etc. And that's true, that's a valid point, but also the camera's focusing system will work a lot better as well. Now, in good light, outdoors and stuff, you know, even the kit lens, f4 to f5.6 will be just fine. But as the light starts to drop a little bit, that's when you start to run into problems, and you have to do some of these workarounds or, you know, manually focus. All right, so let's go into the live view here and look at some of the settings that you can do to control the focusing on the camera, just with what you see on the back of the screen. Now, I've already touched on one literally, and that's this little icon right here. And right now it says off, okay? And this icon, when you're touching it, it toggles through different modes. So let's look at this. This is the touch to focus mode, so that's what we've been doing. But you'll notice right now it says off. That doesn't mean turn off the touch to focus. All that means is turn off this little green box so that you can look at your subject without that distraction of a green box. If I touch it again, you know, the off comes back on. But you'll also notice over here on the right, there's a little scroll bar or slider with a magnifying glass underneath. And that's so you can zoom in on the area that you're focusing on to make sure you've acquired focus on the point that you want. So let me show you how that works. What you do is you touch the focus, you touch the magnify icon, and now it's zoomed in exactly where I'm focusing. But if that's not exactly where I wanted to focus, for example, I can move this. And let me move this over here so that you might be able to see this. But there's a little black frame in the center that the camera is going to use as its focus point while you're zoomed in. So let's say I wanted to focus on this word shoe 4, and I can move this over with my finger, and I'm moving that lettering inside this black box. I can half press the shutter button here, and you can see now the letters shoe 4 are much more in focus. So you can kind of fine tune the focus point a little bit by punching in, and you can punch in and out, okay, adjust the zoom level with the front dial by coming in a little closer or going back out, and your range is 3 times to 14 times. And you'll also notice down here there's another little black gray box down here which represents the entire frame of the picture, and then the little white box represents where you're zoomed in. And then to get back out and look at the full frame again, you just touch underneath. Now watch carefully, because you'll notice when I touch the magnify button, focus, you'll notice the green box is bigger because we're in a 3x zoom. But see this little 1x? It disappears. Okay, but it's still there. 1x means go back out to 1x zoom. But it's still there. It just disappears, I guess, to eliminate even more distractions from when you're punched in. But that's how you kind of get in and out of the zoom mode. Now you're not zooming in like zooming in on a lens and getting a smaller, you know, tighter picture. You're still getting the entire frame. You're just zooming in on one part. Okay, there's another icon on here. I'm sorry, I didn't finish this one. Let's toggle one more time. This is touch to focus. This is touch to focus and take a picture. So now when I pick a focus point, if it acquires focus, it'll take the picture. And then there's also turning the touch to focus off completely, which is represented by this white icon with the finger. And now when I touch the screen, nothing's happening. And this is handy for like when you're shooting with the viewfinder like this, and sometimes your nose might touch the back of the screen and change the focus point on you. So if you shoot with the viewfinder a lot, you may want to turn off the touch screen. Alright, now that's that. One other icon on here is this face detect icon, okay, with the little letter I next to it, and that I means eye detect. So in this particular face detect mode, and the camera's telling me it's in face detect mode, it's going to try to find the face in the frame, and then focus on the closest eye. So I can demonstrate that easily with the clown. And you'll notice right away that the clown is now outlined in a box, meaning the camera has detected the face and will focus on it. And then if I have pressed the shutter button, it will also try to find the closest eye. And with this prop, it's not very reliable. With real people, it's actually not too bad. I personally don't rely on face detect. I always choose the focus point like we were doing earlier with touch to focus. But that's how that works. Now, if I don't want to focus on the person's face but something in the background, say this fan, you'll notice that, oh, nothing's happening because I turned the touch screen off. But let me turn the touch to focus back on. I can still do that. And let me zoom in a little bit more. And you'll notice, even though it's detected the face, I've told the camera to focus behind him. Okay? But if I click the OK button, we'll go back to focusing on the clown's face. Or I can change the focus point again, say over here, and just focus on that. Click the OK button. It's now back to focusing on the face with the eye detect. Alright, now, another thing you can do is you can change the focus point just using the D-pad. So you can see I'm moving the single point focus around. Let's say I want to focus right on his eye. And voila. So that's another way to control the focus point is with the D-pad. But again, I'm going to turn off the face detect because generally speaking, I don't like to let the camera choose focus points for me. I like to choose it directly myself. So let's go into the Super Control panel and see what options we have there for controlling or changing settings for the autofocusing. So if I click the OK button, you'll notice that the camera's telling me I was in a single point autofocus and what point I was focused on, which is sort of near the top right a little bit. If I click OK again, it takes me back into the screen we saw earlier in live view. But there's two icons here, single point autofocus, which tells me what focusing mode I'm in, SAF. And then there's another one down here, the info button with the settings icon. So that's telling me if I click the info button, I have additional settings available. So let's do that. So now you'll see two more icons. The bottom icon has an up-down arrow, which represents pushing the up and down on the D-pad. The icon above it is the face detect icon with right and left arrows, which, let me click the info button, is letting me change the face detect mode. So let's go ahead and turn that off. See, there's also face detect left eye, right eye, and then off. So it's going to, you can ask the camera to try to pick the left eye or the right eye rather than letting the camera pick the eye closest to the camera. But I just like to leave it off. Okay, I click OK, I click the info button. Now by pushing the up and down arrow, I now quickly jump through the different focusing target areas. So this is single point target. This is the full area, so the camera is going to look for something to focus on. This is a 9-point focus, so it's only going to look for a place to focus within these 9 points in the green box. And then this is the small target focus points, so you can have a little bit more granularity and pinpoint the focus a little more. Now the one I use the most generally is this one, single point focus. This is really good enough for 99.9% of my photography. And once you've done that, you can move it around with the D-pad. You can use your finger. Either way when you're in this mode. And again, you'll notice the face detect icon has disappeared, but this touch to focus still works just fine. Alright, let's look at the next thing in the Super Control panel. And these are the autofocus modes. And by default, the camera is set to single target autofocus. But we can change this by rotating the front dial to continuous autofocus. And If you saw my last video on shutter modes or shutter settings, you'll know that continuous autofocus only works in sequential low. Okay, it does not work in sequential high. Because what you're asking the camera to do is for every picture it takes, reacquire focus. If you're just taking the pictures one at a time, that's no different than SAF or single point. But if you're in sequential low, where you hold the shutter button and it's taking multiple pictures, each frame the camera will try to reacquire focus. So let's change the shutter mode to sequential low, because like I said, it does not work in sequential high. Now, let's say I'm moving or the subject is moving, it doesn't matter, but let me put the camera into the focus area, okay, which is that single target, and we'll start here and I'll move back. And ideally, the camera was able to maintain focus with every picture. So let's just take a look. So if you look at the last frame, yeah, it looks like it did. Let's look at the one before. Oh, it missed a little bit. Actually, this is motion blur. It's probably not misfocused. So next thing I need to do, and I talked about this in my very first video, having the right shutter speed is the most important thing. So how do you do that? I'm just going to increase the ISO in this case, so I get a faster shutter speed. So let's crank this up to 3200, and I'm still at a 50th of a second, so I'm going to lower the aperture down to f2. Okay, now I'm at 1/400th of a second, so let's try this one more time. Let's acquire focus and then move back. You can hear the camera's already faster. Alright, now hopefully that worked. Yeah, much better. Tack sharp, tack sharp, tack sharp. So all of those came out really good. Now in the real world or real life, you're going to get about a 50% hit rate, because this is an easy target and I'm not moving very fast. But in real life, I found that I've been able to get maybe 50% in focus using the continuous autofocus with the single point or 9-point targeting mode. So your mileage may vary. It takes a little practice to get good at it, because following the target with a single point or 9 points is pretty difficult with fast moving objects. But it's definitely handy. I've gotten a lot of great shots using this mode. So practice with that and make sure your shutter speed is fast enough depending on the subject. I mean, birds in flight, you should be at like 2,000th of a second. My dog, I'd like to be at 1,000th of a second or higher. People, you can probably be right around 1,000th of a second also. Maybe as low as 500th of a second. But anyway, it's not this video is not about that. Okay, let's look at the next focusing mode in the control panel. Okay, you have manual focus. So if your lens has a focusing ring on it, most do, that just means you're manually focusing, and half pressing the shutter doesn't do anything. Even if I change this, let's see if that does anything. Yeah. The touch to focus is not working either, right? Because we're in manual focus mode. So let's look at the next one. Single point autofocus with manual focus. So what this means is the camera, you will try to autofocus first and acquire focus, and then while you're half pressing the shutter button, okay, let's focus down here. You can, while you're holding the shutter button down, you can fine tune the adjustment, the focus a little bit like so. And I'm sure there's 1,000 creative ways to use this. See, I can zoom in also. So if I want to make sure I've got focus, I can do it manually. So that's one of the uses for that. But like I said, there's probably 1,000 other ways to use that creative. So it's a nice feature to have in the camera. Let's move on to the next feature or next setting. And now we have continuous autofocus with tracking. So now what you're doing is you're asking the camera to try to track whatever it acquired focus on first. And it's going to look in the center of the frame. Okay, and there's still a little black frame on the back of the live view there, and that's where it's going to start. And now you'll see that the tracking icon or focus box is not showing. So you'll notice what the camera's trying to do is stay focused on whatever object I started with. So if I move back, I move over. So let's just try a couple of frames of this. See, now it turned red, it lost focus. All right. Let's just look at the last frame. Oh, it got it. Pretty good. And again, I'm not moving very fast. This is an easy target. So we got a really good hit rate. But in real life, again, this particular focusing mode is even worse than the continuous autofocus without tracking. So I don't recommend you use this setting in the camera. I mean, you can try it. Maybe the newer Mark III camera does a better job. But generally speaking, I've never been able to rely on the continuous autofocus with tracking. It's just, it's terrible. I don't know how else to put it. So don't use that. You're better off choosing a single target or focus point and then just tracking it with your own eyes. Okay? You'll get much better results. Trust me on that. All right, let's see if there's anything left, because I think we've exhausted them. And that's the end, because now we're back to single point autofocus. Okay, and that's everything we can do in the super control panel for the autofocus modes. But right here again is face to priority or face detect. And like I said, I like to keep this off because it's just one less thing you have to think about when you're trying to acquire focus. It's easy enough to acquire, pick a focus point like somebody's face right on your own without the camera doing it for you. Okay, let's go into the menu now and look at some of the options there. So in the menu, let's go back over to the custom menu. Then we'll select the autofocus manual focus. Now this first line item is the same thing pretty much what was in the super control panel. For still pictures, we can select all the same modes. Single point AF, continuous AF, and then movie mode defaults to continuous AF, and then it also has same autofocus modes available to it. Now the rest of these are really more advanced topics for more deliberate type focusing and autofocusing. So I won't get too much into this, but like full-time autofocus, the autofocus just stays on all the time, whether you're pushing the shutter button or not, or touching the screen. And I haven't thought of any reason for using that because it just kind of drains your battery, but maybe there is. AEL, AFL, auto exposure lock, autofocus lock. I have a video on back button focusing for this camera that goes into a lot more detail about that. So if you're interested in this feature, I do already have a video for that called back button focusing. Resetting the lens. This is like when the camera goes to sleep. It'll wake back up and stay on the same focus point. So this is handy for, say, macro photography or other types of photography, but it's just another feature. I just leave reset lens on, which means every time the camera goes to sleep and wakes back up, it just goes back to the minimum focusing distance and f-stop, or it just resets the lens basically like you're turning on the camera fresh, and that's fine with me. I don't like it to be focused somewhere where it left off sometimes. And then bulb time focusing, like I said, these are much more advanced topics that we can get into later. Here's AF illumination. Just you can leave that on. It may help if you have a smaller lens on or one without a lens hood. And then the face priority we already talked about. That's in the super control panel. AF area pointer on, and then AF targeting pad again. Just leave these things off, and I'll cover these maybe in another video because again they're for more deliberate types of photography. But the set home, that's something we may need to get into later as well. Just leave this as default, but this you can tell the camera to you can tell the camera where you want the default focusing position to be. And again, this is for very deliberate photography that you can set, but this can come in handy as well. I never use it personally, but it's nice that it's there. Okay, and that's pretty much it as far as the different auto-focusing modes available and the different ways to use them and the pros and cons, etc. But if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Again, thanks again for all the great feedback. And if you'd like to see more videos, just hit the subscribe button and hopefully we'll see you again soon.